Kubo! Kubo! Can you hear me, Kubo? Your village is burned to the ground. Your enemies aren't far behind. We need to go now. You have questions, I can tell.
Who?
You get 3.
Why only 3?
Okay, that was your first question.
What? I don't understand what's happening.
This is the beginning of your story. Your family is very powerful. Your mother used her magic to save you. Kubo, run! And bring me to life.
What are we gonna do?
We're going to find your father's armor. It's the only thing that can protect you.
Many years ago, I was cursed. This great adventure is my destiny.
Your magic is growing stronger. You need to learn control. Show off.
My father's fortress. This way!
Claim your birthright, Kubo. Give this story a happy ending.
If you must blink. Do it now.
Travis.
Hello.
Art,
Hey, how's it going?
welcome to AOL Build. Congratulations on this film, which opens Friday and has gotten just amazing reviews so far. 90%, I think, on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, who's that one? Who's that guy that doesn't like it?
person?
I got a bone to pick with you, buddy.
So
No, it's great. I mean, we work on this thing forever, so when people like it, it's nice.
My magazine, EW, said that it was gorgeous, full of lavish depth and detail, a visually stunning, richly imagined film, and one of the first truly original movies of the year. So I think that that's pretty accurate. There's a lovely, beautiful plot twist in the film that I'm not going to reveal, obviously. But can you take, just for people who don't know what LAIKA is, we all know what Coraline is, and Paranorman, and the Boxtrolls, all Oscar nominations for Best Animated Feature. But what is LAIKA?
Our studio, LAIKA, started about 10 years ago. We're based in the Pacific Northwest, in Portland, Oregon, the rain-drenched, patchouli-oiled armpit of the Pacific Northwest. And when we started 10 years ago, there were a bunch of us who were stop-motion animators, and we saw the writing on the wall with the ascendancy of the computer in the 90s, where basically the computer took over everything that traditional animation had done, both stop-motion and hand-drawn animation. Everything that we could do, the computer could do better. And so, you know, stop motion really was on life support. You know, it's a technique that goes back to the dawn of cinema, to when Georges Méliès was sending rockets to the moon, when, you know, Willis O'Brien was animating King Kong and Ray Harryhausen was doing all his creature features. And we really figured that if we wanted to justify using this medium in a viable way, we needed to bring it into a new era. We need to reinvigorate it. And so that was the beginning of the process. We started the company, and we fused this old way of making movies, this tradition and this history, with cutting-edge technology and innovation, fusing those things together. And that's the methodology that we use to bring our movies to life. And philosophically, the kinds of movies that we want to make is we fundamentally just want to make movies that matter, things that are thought-provoking and interesting and emotionally resonant and enrich people's lives in some way. We always want to tell new and original stories, and that's what drives us at the studio.
So how many years ago did you start conceiving Kubo?
We've been working on Kubo for 5 years, so it's a good long while. These things take, the pace of making an animated film is pretty glacial.
And though the material is completely original, it's not based on a comic or a book. What was the genesis of the story? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so the original idea came from our brilliant character designer, Shannon Tyndall, a guy that I'd worked with on Coraline. He was one of our key character designers on Coraline, and we'd known each other for years. He'd done some work for the studio over the years, doing on some of our development projects. And he always had a really keen eye, but a really brilliant mind as well. And so when he called me up and told me that he wanted to pitch a couple projects to the studio, I jumped at the chance. Flew down to LA, we had dinner at this dimly lit Scottish restaurant, and over a meal of Yorkshire pudding and shepherd's pie, he pitched me the bones of a handful of projects. And one of them really, really excited me. It really stuck to my bones, even more than the haggis. And that was the idea that ultimately became Kubo and the two strings. And so the notion from, the idea from, it started there, and then over that 5-year period, it became this film. But at the beginning, there was something that was really exciting about it, because it was this sweeping stop-motion epic, something we'd never seen in this medium before. But what excited me about it personally, what drew me to it personally, was it evokes so much of my own life experience. As a kid, I loved big epic fantasies. I loved Tolkien and, Lord of the Rings. And that was something that was almost genetically embedded in my genetic code, because my mom was reading Lord of the Rings when she was pregnant with me. And so in a very real way, it was one of the first great gifts of my mother, a love of fantasy. And then when I was around 8 years old, my dad took me on one of his business trips to Japan for the first time. And that was, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and that was really my first exposure to Japan. And it was unlike anything that I'd ever seen or experienced before. And that was the beginning of a real lifelong love affair with this great and beautiful culture. And so this film was kind of the convergence of those two things. It's a love of fantasy that I got from my mom, and a love of the transcendent art of Japan that I got from my dad, all bound together in a movie that's about the sustaining love of family.
Right, and in order to bring it to life, you need all these voices, obviously. Almost all your main cast have not done animated voice work before. Matthew McConaughey, Charlize Theron, Rooney Mara, and Art. What made you decide on Art for the lead role? I mean, he's in every single scene.
Yeah, no, he's the heart and soul of the film. For a film like this, it's critical that you get your central character right. I mean, and finding a young actor who, with that kind of depth of emotion, who can bring a character to life using just their voice, it's really challenging. It was first of all, finding just any young actor who can be natural, not acting with a capital A, who you completely believe in, is tough. But when you have to communicate everything with your voice, it becomes even more challenging. And so, we basically auditioned hundreds and hundreds of actors in virtually every English-speaking territory on Earth. And I didn't. At one point, I didn't know how we were going to find him, and then we did in a small Irish village of all places. And it was like a gift from the universe. I mean, he was just astonishingly good, and I thank God every day that our casting director found him, because he's just so good.
So, Art, you were 11 years old, I think, when you first met Travis?
Yeah, I was 11 years old whenever I started the project.
And what was the first conversation like with Travis about the character, and then about your voice?
Well, I had a huge admiration for the work that LAIKA had done in the past, because I'd worked with one actor in particular, Isaac Hampstead Wright, and he'd worked on the Boxtrolls with Travis, and he'd always explained to me whenever we were working on Game of Thrones what it was like, and it was so sort of intriguing to me. So I wanted to find out as much as possible, and Travis really educated me on the whole sort of procedure that you go through to make a film like this.
What about your voice? I mean, you're speaking now with your normal voice, but in the film we don't hear that your accent.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in this industry, and working with so many people who are from other countries, foreign countries to me. You hear a lot of American accents, so it was something that I always thought about. If a director tells you something and he's got an American accent, you're always thinking about what he's told you in his accent. So the accent's always sort of circulating in your head. And then whenever it came the time to sort of really bring an American accent to life, I worked with my mom a lot, and I talked to a few people who were American on different twangs of the accent, and eventually we just worked it out.
When you're recording, and these are pretty long recording sessions, do you speak in the voice of the character even when you're talking to Travis?
I don't usually. Travis probably wished I did.
He breaks out of it when he's not being Kubo. And the other thing is that he has a tutor. So after a handful of hours, he goes away and he essentially goes to school, and then he comes back and works some more. But he's taught in Gaelic.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
really?
I'm an Irish speaker, a fluent Irish speaker, and I go to an Irish speaking school. So it's like if I take a couple of weeks out to do some work, it needs to be in Irish. So that can be difficult to find an Irish speaking tutor. But it was actually the director of a film I worked on, Dracula Untold. His now wife was my tutor there, and so we brought her on to the studio for Kubo on the Two Strings, and it was amazing. But it can be difficult to sort of switch in and out of the characters, from myself to Kubo, and especially in animation, because you're not in the costume and you're not in the shoes of the character, figuratively and literally, and you're not on the set, so that can be difficult, to channel all your emotion that you can usually express in your physicalities, and bring that into your voice. But we worked on it, and I think eventually we got it.
Yeah, I mean, so Gaelic was your first language?
It's not my first language, no. I started learning Gaelic whenever I was about 4 years old in an Irish-speaking school, and ever since then I've been speaking it.
Well, I mean, he sounds great. And also the other actors in the film, we have Matthew McConaughey here in a really sort of great role for him, very lovable, very sort of goofy. But talk about directing McConaughey just as a voice actor and sort of stripping out some of that Texas twang.
Yeah, I mean, we had actors from all over the world that worked on this movie, and it's a period fantasy. But we couldn't have actors who were speaking as if they're from all over the world. We needed them to speak essentially with one dialect, essentially unaccented American English. And so, even though, we had an actress from South Africa, someone from New York, someone from Ireland, someone from the UK, someone from Texas, they all had to sound like they were from the same place on Earth. And so pretty much everybody had to strip away their normal regional accent. And with Matthew, I think one of the things that most people associate Matthew with is his Texas drawl. But early on, when we sent him the script, he loved it. He read it to his kids as a bedtime story in installments.
Great. And
he really loved the material. But he said, "You need me to get rid of my Texas accent, don't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, we do." But he did it, and so it's not immediately apparent that it's Matthew, but he still has that same. He just oozes charisma and charm, just like you would expect him to do in a live-action film.
What's working with Charlize Theron like, Art?
It's nerve-wracking, but at the same time, she'd never done too much animation and stuff like that as well.
So she was new to it as well, the same way you were.
So we were all in the same boat, really, except she had years of experience in sort of live-action work, so that was nerve-wracking. But I think it was more nerve-wracking working with Brenda Vaccaro, because she was in, the Smurfs, Johnny Bravo. She's been in so much animation, so it was like, how do you walk into a studio with somebody who has years of walking into that same studio on you? And but she was lovely, and she really helped me out.
Yeah, the movie's so much about parents and children. Your father is someone that we all know, Phil Knight. In what ways, and maybe you can talk about how you were able to share some of the direction you gave Art. We all have complicated relationships with our parents. In what ways is this a sort of either a love letter or a sort of commentary on your own relationship with your parents, and how were you able to sort of help Art find the character that way? Well,
I think that's what you try to do, when you're developing a story, is you try to find parallels between the characters in your own life and look at each one of these characters without judgment, try to understand where they're coming from. And if you can find that common link between what they're going through and things that you've experienced, it makes it that much easier. And I'm sure it's a similar thing with acting. If you can find an aspect of who this character is that is similar to your own experience, you can bring that part of your life to bear when you're bringing the character to life. For me, Kubo he's very much like me. He was, he's an artist, he's a storyteller, he's a musician, he's an animator, really, when you think about what he does. And so on that level, he very much is similar to who I am. But in other ways too, his mother is absolutely the center of his universe. It's everything that he orbits around is his mom. And he has this, towering figure of a father, the greatest samurai the world had ever known, as something of this kind of thing that casts a shadow on him. He's not really a kind of a present part of his life, and yet it's this thing that he has to live up to. So I think in a lot of ways, I could relate to that aspect of it, that, you know, he has a legendary father and a mother that he loves more than anything in the world, and then he goes on this incredible journey. And so you find aspects of it, and it wasn't hard for me to find those common links between my life and the characters.
Mm-hmm. The movie, we can just see from the trailer, has these just magnificent set pieces in it as the characters are going on their quest. But I want to ask you about one in particular, involves a giant skeleton, which they have to defeat. Can you tell me about how that was done at LAIKA, and also how that was different than normal? I mean, normally we think of stop motion as the animator being sort of a giant compared to the little tiny characters. How that was sort of the opposite in this case.
Yeah, it really was the first time that the puppet dwarfed the animator. This thing was enormous. It was 16 feet tall. It had a 23-foot wingspan. It weighed 400 pounds. The way we had to animate him was we put his torso on a metal base that was a motion base that we built at the studio, and it was essentially like a flight simulator or like the motion base of a virtual reality ride at a theme park. And that allowed us to move it on all different axes, but keep it supported, because the last thing you want is the thing to collapse and murder your animator as they're animating this puppet. And so, but it was the biggest thing that we'd ever built, and it was ridiculous. I mean, he was effectively like a giant marionette. He had automobile brake pads in his elbow joints. He was and we went through 3 sets of them over the course of the making. He had cables attached to his wrists. He was like a big marionette, and the cables went up to the ceiling and dropped back down and were held in place by buckets filled with sandbags. It was just enormous, this thing. And yet one animator effectively devoted 1.5 years of his life to bringing this thing to life, a frame at a time. Some days he would get half a second worth of footage in a single day. And he did a great job, I think, at the small price of a little bit of his sanity.
Yeah.
He would talk to the skeleton. He would wish it good morning at the beginning of the day. He would wish it good night at the end of every evening. He called him Bud. But he did a great job. He really poured a lot of himself into this thing. And when you see it on screen, it's really extraordinary.
And a half a second is how much? I mean, that's like about...
It's 12 frames.
12 frames.
12 individual little pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, a second of footage in any sort of film is really 24 unique images. And in stop motion, you're posing that, and you're taking a picture, you move it a little bit, you'll take another picture. And so sometimes, 5 minutes can elapse between when you take the last frame, but in something like that, hours
So
between
for a
frames.
sequence that lasts, how many minutes in the film? About 5 or...
Yeah, it's probably like 3 minutes maybe.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
How long did that take?
The whole thing on multiple units with multiple animators, it took pretty much the full 2 years to shoot.
Wow. Were you able to sort of peek in and see them while they were working on all this?
Yes. So,
You were?
sort of mid-production, I went to I went to Portland, Oregon, and we did a few sessions in the studio there. But the main reason why we went was to do a tour of the LAIKA studios, and it was so amazing to see. Everything was basically like fully working things, except it was miniature, and that was class to see. And like everything, there was like whole towns and villages just propped up on tabletops. And it was actually on the day that we were there, Travis was there filming the very last scene of the Boxtrolls. So it wasn't just like a tour of seeing how everything's made. It was like actually seeing the animators work, and that was probably the coolest experience of my life.
Well, he's young still. There'll be better ones to come.
Well, speaking of that, you, I mean, you're well known to all of us from Game of Thrones, but you're not really able to. I mean, I don't know if you are now. Your mom might let you see some of it.
Yeah, I watch it now.
You do watch it now. Okay, you're 14. You can.
Yeah.
But this, when was the first time you saw, not even the finished product, but you saw what this was going to look like at Kubo, and what did you think?
So it was about 3 months ago now, and I was at home, and we got a call from someone at Focus, and they were like, okay, so we've got the film, but it's not completely done. Mm-hmm. So don't get worried whenever you see it. It's not completely done. The CGI isn't inputted into it yet, and we were like, okay, and we weren't expecting to see even the full film, but the full film was done. It just didn't have any CGI, and it made me want to like cry. And it's like whenever you look at something like this, it's not making me cry out of, pride. It's making me cry because it's such a powerful film, and it's such an amazing film, even without any of the CGI. So it wasn't even a completed film, and it had my mum running around in tears, and it was really amazing.
Travis, talk about Art's voice and how you sort of had sort of sell-by date. You knew that there was a point at which he was not going to be a real viable kid anymore for your movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes in animation they will cast grown women as kids because their voices can stay the same. They don't change over a period of time, but kids have a certain quality to their voice at a certain time in their lives. And Kubo, you know, in this film, he's around 12 years old, which is the exact age Art was when we captured most of his voice in the movie. But the thing about, as anyone knows, the thing about a 12-year-old boy is the voice of a 12-year-old boy changes very quickly. And so we had a very compressed amount of time that we had to try to capture every word in the English language, Art speaking, over about 6 months. And period. And so we did this extensive, like every handful of weeks, we would do these big long sessions trying to capture every aspect of the film. Art went away to do a movie in Australia, San Andreas, and by the time he came back for our last session, something had happened, and his voice was about as deep as mine at that point,
Right.
and he had a little bit of a mustache. And from the moment he first did the first line, we just had to take a little pause, and it was like, oh boy, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, I remember sitting in the studio, and Travis looked nervous from the moment he heard me say hello, but he was like, "Okay, Art, let's give it a go." And then I sort of said my first line, and he goes and he pressed the button to talk to me, and he goes, "Yep, that was great. You just need to have a chat for a minute." And he just turned, and he wasn't trying to hide his physicalities at all, so he turned to Ariane and was like, and
Got bad poker face.
yeah, so after that, I had to work on sort of pitching it a little bit higher and stuff, but
Yeah, so I gently asked him if he could try to pitch his voice up a little bit, which for a teenage boy, it's not easy to do. But he did it, and we got great usable stuff in the session, and it's kind of interwoven all throughout the movie. And so, but we knew that this was the last time that he'd be able to do the voice.
But we can hear a dialogue from that session in the film.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think we have time for some questions from you guys. Go ahead, sir.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. So my question is for Travis. So being the CEO of LAIKA and also the director of the film, was it difficult having to balance the creative side of filmmaking and the business aspect of it?
Yeah, I think since we started LAIKA, I've occupied multiple positions within the company, and pretty much everybody at LAIKA wears multiple hats. We all pitch in wherever we're able to. So, I animate on the films, I produce the films, I oversee the company. This one I happen to direct. And so I think that it's a kind of a strange way to spend your day, where some of the day you're focused exclusively on minutia and tiny little bits of detail, and you're an artist bringing things to life with your hands. And other parts of the day you're thinking about, you're going to marketing meetings and thinking about the global view of the company and having meetings with your distributor. And so all day long, it's kind of this push and pull where you dive into the production, you pull out of the production, and you kind of have to extricate yourself from it, and you're effectively bifurcating your brain in some weird way. But I actually think that having a foot in each world has made me better at each job. I think, the danger of being an artist is sometimes you get lost in the detail, you lose sight of the big picture. And the danger of being an executive is that sometimes, you think you're making a product when in fact you're also making a work of art. And so I think that each one makes me better at the other. As an artist, I'm able to see the big picture, and as an executive, I'm never far away from reminding myself that what we're doing is making beautiful works of art. And so it can be challenging because you're pushing and pulling all day long, but I love it. I think it's one of the things that gets me most excited about what I do, is just the variety of my day.
Did LAIKA take its name from that Russian dog?
Yes, we did. LAIKA was the first dog in space. And we thought there was something aspirational about it, this mutt of humble origins who touched the stars. Of course, LAIKA died horribly in space. It's not a nice ending to that story. No. So we hope that we avoid the same fate. But the idea of it is so lovely.
There is a great movie, My Life as a Dog, Lasse Hallström film about a little kid who thinks about that dog and dreams about that dog. So I love the title. I think it is aspirational. Somebody else?
Hey guys, congrats on the film. I actually got to see a screen of it last night, and I thought it was really beautiful and well put together. So what I liked was the origami usage in the movie. So I was wondering, what was the process like doing that, and what kind of ideas did you have in mind for the origami?
Yeah, so Origami is how Kubo tells his stories. He's essentially he's a filmmaker. He's an animator, and so he has these flat pieces of paper, and through his will, his imagination, through his music, through his art, he can bring these things to life. And that way, he's very much like an animator or an actor. Through his imagination, he can give life to something that's inert. And the way we actually did it is, we worked in multiple scales. So when Kubo is standing there and we have little bits of paper, those are tiny little pieces of kind of thin paper that we back with an aluminum foil type material that allows us to pose at a frame at a time. But then when we push into the scale of the origami, we see the big battles and everything. Those were 700% scale of the normal size. So the real little tiny Hanzo, the origami man, he's a little over an inch tall. And then when we push in, it's about 8, 9, 10 inches tall. And the material that we used, we tried a lot of different things. We tried paper, but it wouldn't hold up. Over the course of a 2-year production cycle, when you're working on these things, these puppets go through a lot of abuse. And animators are disgusting. They sweat, they're filthy, they don't wash their hands, they've got big greasy sausage fingers, and they're manhandling these puppets. And so we tried using paper, and it just did not work. They fell apart almost immediately. So we tried cardstock, we tried urethane, we tried a lot of different things, and ultimately what we ended up using was Tyvek, which is this material you often find in construction that they wrap houses in, or in like a FedEx envelope where it's got that plasticky, papery material. And it's great because it moves and it folds just like paper, but it's really durable. It's virtually tear-proof. And so that's how we brought the origami figures to life. And through a number of different transitions over the course of it, we get them to change shape, just like you do in 2D animation. But it took a long time. We essentially had 2 guys who specialized just in origami over the course of the whole show.
One more question.
Hi, I'm Megan. I actually saw the movie earlier this week, and I love the art of the storytelling of it. I wanted to know, what did you want the audience to take away from the film? Because I love that it was pretty much a coming of age of Kubo.
What did you take from it, Art?
I took away, and I know this is something that probably is very visible at the end of the film, as you probably know, but the sense of forgiveness you take away from a film like that, and it's like, it really is a coming of age, because I don't think a lot of like young boys like Kubo have a sense of forgiveness like that at the end of the film. So that's what I took away from it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It really is a maturation metaphor. It's a story about a boy who crosses the Rubicon from childhood to adulthood, and the things that we gain and the things that we leave behind along the way. And there's so much great stuff that comes from being an adult, but it does come at a cost. You do lose something, and so when things irrevocably shift, that's something that we explore in this movie about that time in our lives. I think fundamentally, it is a story about grief and loss, but it's also about healing. It's about growth, and it's about love. And so there's a kind of a fundamental, beautiful, joyful spirit that percolates from the core of what this movie is. It really is a celebration of what it means to be human in all its beauty and in all its flaws. And I think when we get to the end of it, we understand that the film really is a meditation on healing and forgiveness and empathy and compassion. And I think in this fractured world that we live in, we could all use a little bit more of that.
So Kubo opens Friday, August 19th. You're at your sort of journey's end. How do you feel? Are you exhausted?
Yeah, I'm exhausted. I'm racked with nerves. My gut is all clenched up. Please go see the movie.
Please go see the movie. On that note. Thank you, Travis and Art, for being here. And everybody, go see it. Opens on Friday. You'll love it.
Thank you.